Well, good day to you all. My name is Rahul Kamath, and I drive product management for Enterprise Data Management Cloud, which is a module within our EPM cloud offering, and a solution that is also sold separately, given its value across the enterprise. I'm really excited to be with you today and want to spend our time together introducing EDM to those of you who aren't familiar with it, and then take some time to talk to you about what's new and what's next. Um, in terms of what's new, we'll cover material from the time that we met last year here at Solutions in 2020. And so you'll have a good summary view of what's been happening in the world of EDM since we last met. So without further ado, let's dive right in. In terms of enterprise data management, it behooves us to talk a little bit about what is enterprise data to begin with, and to summarize, really, enterprise data is can potentially be classified into master data, reference data, metadata, and in general, all of these different types of data that we manage within EDM are effectively measures of value across different domains and lines of business, right? So from a finance perspective, of course, the usual suspects are chart of accounts, all of the different types of segments within your chart of accounts, the associated trees, and so on. And those can vary depending upon the company you're working with. And they transcend the operational and the analytical realms. So it's not just about what you post, but also how you report against it. So being able to manage and master all of the elements, whether there's sort of dimensions, member lists, alternate hierarchies, cross-domain mappings, and so on and so forth. And then broadly from a business perspective, we aren't limited only to financial data elements. We have a domain agnostic foundation. And so you can pretty much model any business entity, either horizontal or vertical in nature, across the various pillars of your operations and analytical application basis. And then the reference data pieces are really about tying together all the various applications with a common set of reference data assets, whether they're industry classifications, market segments, different taxonomies that you need to define the speak of your enterprise in order to build consistency across all of your applications. And so that brings us to change management around that enterprise data, which is prevalent across the edges of your enterprise. And changes can be routine in nature, such as, I'm a sales manager, I open a new sales office, I'd like a new cost center to be able to book my operating expenses against. And I need visibility in terms of that request all the way through till such time that it becomes available for me within the system. So that I can have representatives on my team be able to book their expenses against it and record and report against it. So those are the kinds of sort of routine changes. But then there are those transformational business events that occur infrequently within the life cycle of a company, and those could be related to a digital transformation effort, a financial transformation effort, or a reorg or M&A type of activity. You may also be looking to transform your business model entirely in order to be more competitive in your own market. And so those are pivotal decision points within the life cycle of an enterprise that structurally change the way we operate and report and so on. And so it becomes imperative for us to be able to model those changes in a safe environment, be able to secure approvals around it, and then deploy them into a production context. So what are the use cases around EDM? I like to think of them as the 4 A's of EDM, and that includes helping you accelerate cloud adoption. So as you're looking to become a cloud-first company, it's important to be able to harvest all the structural metadata from existing application bases and understand what the future needs to look like in order to proof ourselves from all of the potential challenges and risks that that may lie ahead. EDM is a great way to drive that kind of transformation. Similarly, when you're doing M&A, you have all kinds of corporate structures that need to be mapped into your existing structure in order to reconcile all of the overlaps and differences, and then ultimately turn around and report to Wall Street or whatever statutory agency you're working with, while maintaining various perspectives for internal management reporting, tax reporting, and so on and so forth. And so EDM can help you there. In terms of aligning how you operate and how you report, building that kind of structural alignment is critical because changes are constantly occurring as we operate our business, and those need to percolate through across various applications that need to consume those changes or use them to inform structures that need to be maintained downstream. So I add a new account in my general ledger. I want to make sure that I'm planning for it in next year's fiscal budget, and so on. And lastly, from an audit perspective, you really want to have an understanding of who made what change, where, when, and why, be able to understand what sequence those changes occurred in, and have a set of policies that inform that change activity as you go, so that you can insulate yourself from fines, penalties, and all of the issues that occur if we aren't in compliance with corporate standards and government regulations. So when we introduced EDM 3.5 years ago now, we essentially wanted to address all of the challenges that came before us in times before. And historically, the whole industry was focused on delivering master data management solutions to enterprises. And what we learned from the arrows in our back effectively was that customers really wanted first-class perspectives around the applications that they work with, because traditional mastering abstracts the applications in favor of something that is more of a maintenance structure, and then they filter that maintenance structure to consume it, across the application bases that need that data. So one of the first things we recognized was that there is really this concept of a data sharing continuum that allows you to evolve from a more natural view of the world, which is the applications you use on a day-to-day basis and the metadata within them, and ultimately, the mastering on the right-hand side of your spectrum, which is a incremental baby stepping type of a process that needs to be non-disruptive, as opposed to a sort of shotgun approach that traditional MDM requires. The other aspect was that, when you're in the cloud and you're incrementally adding new applications, you don't want to be limited from disruptions that traditional MDM would require of you as you onboard new applications. And so you needed an incremental approach to support that. And so with EDM, we completely reimagined traditional MDM and really sort of put it on its side by saying that true first-class application views, not just filtered references against that maintenance structure I talked about, is really what you want. And obviously, you want to be able to visualize those structures as they are in your connected application, and be able to leverage a shopping cart metaphor that is similar to the ones we experience in e-commerce around the consumption of changes to that master reference data asset. And then you want this agile incremental approach to be able to rationalize that data in time, and then use just-in-time governance policies and rules to essentially manage that process of change and imbue it with the relevant set of enrichments and approvals as is desired by the enterprise. And so enter EDM. Circa January 2018, we came out with this new innovative approach that has proven itself out rather well across the 350 plus customers we have today globally, and they're served through a variety of different capabilities, including a set of packaged application adapters that allow us to integrate through a plug and play mechanism with ERP and EPM cloud, and then a universal adapter that really allows us to be open to any application within your ecosystem, whether they're on-premise, in the cloud, Oracle, non-Oracle, and so on. We also introduced a new information model that I'll touch on briefly, and enabled a variety of collaboration and change capabilities via a mechanism we call a request, which is a fundamental building block of change. We introduced inference-based policy-driven governance workflow capabilities, which are pivotal to the kind of change management activity that is part of EDM. And last but not the least, we also have we are a node within your SOA fabric that allows you to integrate with pretty much any application through either REST APIs, the use of a scripting tool like EPM Automate, or even our EPM Task Manager integration that allows you to schedule integrations and synchronize data sets. So in terms of the innovations that we delivered in this past year since we last met as solutions, there's a variety of these. I'll briefly touch on a few that are relevant here. The notion of extracts we introduced that allows you to export information out of any viewpoint vis-a-vis a bound viewpoint, which was typically what we allowed you to do using our traditional exports. And to support that, this really is reminiscent of custom exports in DRM that really are fully configurable. And we've introduced the concept of global connections to pair with the extracts so that now you can post to a data lake like Oracle Object Storage, or you can post to the FBDI interface with an ERP cloud, or to an EPM cloud connection, so that you can use our universal application adapter in addition to the packaged adapters to address any new and emerging business processes that may need dimensionality coming out of EDM. We support the attribute dimensions maintenance for EPM Cloud natively within EDM. We also introduced the ability to do incremental exports, particularly of member lists. This is a use case that's relevant for eBusiness Suite and Financials Cloud, where they might want incremental updates to their value sets. So we're constantly investing in features that are broadly useful, such as the extracts and global connections, and then specific to our application adapters to augment their functionality and value. A big step forward in the world of governance was one we took in April 21 with the introduction of the enrichment stage, and subsequently in 2110 we introduced the commit stage, and we'll talk about that in terms of new policies and stages in these areas. And in 2107 we introduced the concept of application templates, which we'll also talk about today, which is really about porting your metadata from a test environment into a production environment so that you can incrementally develop and deploy new applications within EDM. In terms of our information model, it behooves us to understand that we're sort of two top-level containers. The sort of biggest container is really the concept of what we call an application, which you register within EDM, and it can have one or more dimensions. And then each dimension can have one or more viewpoints that really represent portals into that dimensionality from an end user perspective that are powered by what we call a data chain. And so the data chain obviously consists of a variety of different elements, such as node types, which store the records or nodes, hierarchy sets that store the relationships, node sets that serve as more of a filter on the prior two data chain elements that help you ultimately construct a viewpoint. And multiple viewpoints are packaged together in a view that an end user can access through our user interface. And so As you can see, we've introduced a variety of different features along the different dimensions of the information model, as well as the properties that describe the attribution for each information object that's modeled within EDM. And I want to talk to you briefly about the application blockout periods, which is a feature we introduced recently. Um, and so this was something that was driven by our customers in Idea Lab. So as you approach a financial close period, there may be times within your financial calendar that you want to block out from making any metadata changes. And so EDM really offers you the ability now at the application level to specify a period, a start and end date, within which you don't want to post any changes. And so if there are any change requests that are created or enriched or approved, those processes can continue on as before. Only when it comes time to post them to the target application, those are governed by whether or not a blockout period is currently active or enabled. When that period concludes or the blockout is disabled, we apply the validations against those requests and post all the changes that are valid. Otherwise, the requesters receive the request in their inbox to be able to fix those issues. And so this is a sort of a nice non-disruptive way for customers to be able to manage these application blockouts through pure configuration. And in terms of our views and viewpoints, we've got this badging process that allows you to quickly visually understand, if a particular viewpoint is currently under a blockout period, and if so, what that window, that blockout window might look like. Additionally, from an information model perspective, there's obviously the data chain that we discussed, but also the ability for you to create views. And these views are either defaulted for you or are created or tailored by you in order to drive certain types of change management experiences that are relevant to your organization. Oftentimes, you may end up having a lot of views and you want to focus the attention of your user base on specific views that are required of them to make changes in. And so for this purpose, we've introduced this concept of a user filter as a configuration on your view that allows you to really focus and tailor the experience in a way so that it includes all users who have data access, which is sort of the default behavior without the filter, or the ability to include only specified users or groups, or exclude them as so. And so this really is a new powerful capability that allows you to sort of cut through the plethora of views that you may have and really focus the attention of end users on the views that you desire them to participate in terms of their whole sort of change management and governance experience. Additionally, in terms of the application adapters, as you can see, we have a variety of packaged adapters and then a universal adapter at the very bottom of the page. And so in the spirit of continuous improvement, we've got a number of enhancements that we've done around EPM Cloud, such as attribute dimension support, the ability to, at a touch of a button, upgrade planning applications to the planning module. So AKA from PBCS to ePBCS in terms of the EDM instance of that data. And from an ERP standpoint, we now support the ability to import individual trees for a given value set, as opposed to loading them all together as a zip file containing value sets and trees, all trees. And then we've also allowed you to now enable duplicates or shared nodes for specific tree versions. A number of enhancements there. One of the key things I wanted to touch on here is the concept of from a lifecycle management perspective, we now have the ability to package up a specific application model within an environment, export it to a JSON file, and then be able to import it into the target environment. So this allows you to be able to model an entire application within a test environment and then port it over into a target application where that into a target instance where that application does not yet exist. In terms of the benefits of this this vehicle that we're offering here, from a customer perspective, obviously it is really helpful to incrementally plan, model, test, and promote individual applications from a development or test environment into production. And then for the partners listening in, this is a really wonderful opportunity for you to be able to pre-package functionality as it relates to application types where you have a certain mastery, to be able to model those in advance and develop these pre-packaged application templates to help serve as accelerators in order to differentiate your EDM practice and offering. And so visually, sort of what this experience really looks like is that you essentially have the ability in a source environment to export the template to, like I said, a JSON file that contains the metadata. Looks something like this, which contains all of your applications, dimensions, the associated data chain objects, any common objects like lookup sets and others that are relevant, and also permissions and policy assignments for the users and groups that are in the target environment that you're exporting to. And then within that target environment, we obviously have the ability to import those objects. And then, of course, you'll be able to actually visualize and see all of those metadata objects within that target environment, whether it's applications and dimensions, the underlying views and viewpoints, and so on. Next, I want to touch on governance workflows. So this is something that we're incredibly proud of as a feature and capability within EDM. We have over 6 patents filed and several granted in this area. And this inference engine of ours really allows us to take a data-driven approach, which means that every request is unique and it depends upon the payload of the request, the items that you're looking to change within the request, and they can transcend different subject areas. So I could have 3 products I'm requesting, updates to an existing cost center. Maybe I want to change the owner of that cost center, and then I want to do a reorg of my product hierarchy or what have you. And so in that sense, I might have multiple data types that are requested, and from a permission model perspective, those might have different owners who need to participate from a enrichment or an approval perspective. So as you can imagine, it's a very dynamic process. The other aspect of our governance workflows is they're policy-based, which means that really the workflow experience is, for the business, by the business. They can define effectively change management and governance policies around who can enrich what or who can approve what data objects. And through policy definition, the inference engine will invite the right set of stakeholders at the right point in time in order to participate. And once the policy is fulfilled, it'll go ahead and uninvite any stakeholders that are no longer required. You can also implement the 4 Eyes principle and make sure that your change management experience is what is often referred to as RACI compliant, for responsible, accountable, contributing, and informed participation. And we offer a built-in visualization experience that allows you to a priori model all of the changes within the request experience that ensures that you can do the impact analysis necessary before actually submitting a change at any stage within the workflow. And so when we think about the different stages that the data progresses as it's prepared to be posted to a application, there's a process of obviously requesting changes. That is the submit stage. And upon submission, the request is transitioned over to the approval stage, where we offer you the ability to enrich or simply approve a particular change. And then in our last release, we introduced the commit stage, which we'll talk about shortly. And then we have, upon commit, a set of change. You have the ability to define email notifications through policy definition that'll propagate information about the changes to those who need to stay informed, but aren't necessarily participants in the traditional sense of the word within that workflow. And last but not least, once changes are posted to a particular application, it becomes important for those listening to that application to subscribe to those changes. And so we have this whole concept of subscription that helps you traverse that data sharing continuum we talked about in order to help you harmonize the data across the different applications that need that information. And so we have a number of enhancements in this realm and across the areas of sort of data stewardship, where you're engaging in change management using requests, or performing governance activities that are policy driven, or specifying data sharing and security rules in order to drive the right behaviors around the access to the data and participation in the governance workflows. And so I won't have time today to go through each of these in detail. We have Customer Connect sessions where we've gone through those in detail. I'd encourage you to look at those. But I'll go through some of the highlighted items today just to give you a flavor for the highlights. So the first of those is around a simplified permission model. So previously we used to have the concept of a browser and submitter permissions, and we've collapsed those into a single permission we call participant permission. This allows people to have this can be assigned at the application dimension, node type, or hierarchy set level, as can other permissions that have existed before. And participants can view the data as well as submit and enrich requests based upon their data access level. And so when it comes to data access, the participant permission can be configured either to read or to write, and you have further granularity in terms of controlling what kinds of actions you can perform if you do indeed have the ability to make changes, as well as define what we call property permission filters, where you can specify exactly what level of access a particular user or group has on specific attributes or properties. And so these can be no access or read access or edit access, depending upon what your requirements may be. Now, with that as background, it's worth noting that those who do have the ability to participate in the governance process, you really have two sort of levels of capabilities. One is you can be invited as a collaborator within the submit stage, which means that you don't have control over the request. That resides with the request owner or assignee. But as a collaborator, you can participate in a request by enriching it, but not being able to submit it. That submission control resides with the request owner or assignee. And then within the approval stage, you can be invited as an enricher, which means that not only can you make changes to what was submitted, but you can also augment the request with your own set of changes depending upon your own permissions on the data within the purview of that request. And so in terms of driving the permission-driven change control in the submit and the approval stages, you really have two classes of capabilities. The one we talked about around collaboration really implies that a collaborator can only contribute at the intersection of the permissions of the assignee or the request owner and the collaborator themselves. However, an enricher has a more powerful authoring experience where they're essentially authorized to make changes within the purview of their own right permissions, independent of those of the original submitter or owner of the request. And so this brings us to, the enrichment feature that was introduced this year, which allows you to, through configuration, by essentially checking this box here, giving a specific user or group the authority to make changes as an approver within the approval stage. Now, in terms of how enrichment might work during this approval stage, there are a couple of patterns that are at play. Let's imagine that we have an approval policy that is set up for serial approval or sequential enrichment and approval. The authorized users who have right access, depending upon their data access level, when they receive an invitation to approve a request, are then authorized to make changes. And when they submit it, that request will transition over to the next participant in that sequential method of approval, and so on and so forth. And so when one user approves the changes of the submitter implicitly by submitting their own stage, the next approver steps in and provides their approval. And if they're authorized to do enrichment, they can add their own items or make changes to the original request as needed. Now, this can get significantly more complex depending upon how how the process evolves. So if I have a particular set of users who do their own enrichment by adding additional items, and maybe they trigger additional data objects as part of that request payload, it could trigger its own set of policies that would require additional approval for the new and incremental changes that this particular approver may have made. And so as you can see here, it's a very organic and natural process that allows you to make changes incrementally, enhance changes of the original requester, and then trigger the required set of policies in a very adaptive, dynamic, and incremental way to deliver a very comprehensive governance experience for our end user community. Next, I wanted to cover yet another type of policy we call a commit policy. And this is a new policy that allows for a separation of duties between those who are either authoring changes, enriching them, approving them, and those who are not engaged in making any changes, but simply responsible for making sure that the request is ready to post. And there are a couple of scenarios in which this could be really valuable. As you may know, we have two types of policies when it comes to approvals that could be following either a sequential or parallel method. And for the parallel method, when the policy is fulfilled, the request typically is posted to the application. However, if you had a commit policy in place, then they would essentially come together to the commit stage where the commit user or group would ultimately authorize the final approval of all of the changes that might have gone on and approved in parallel. Similarly, for a single policy, you might have multiple parallel approvers. And once again, you might choose to define a commit policy that allows you to transition to the closed stage by having a separation of duties between those who are participating in the change and those who simply need to inspect and approve and post the changes. Policies and requirements upon them always have increasing levels of complexity, and sometimes there's a desire to conditionally introduce policies that are driven by data changes in the request. And so you now have the ability to define property triggers where you specify one or more properties in order to either trigger a new approval policy or a new notification policy or a new policy of your choice. And so this is a nice incremental feature that allows for a very powerful conditional approval stage to be added based on changes in the underlying or the types of changes that are being made in the underlying request. Subscriptions, which we touched on briefly as we discussed the workflow, is really the process of recognizing that when I'm comparing two viewpoints and trying to figure out the differences repeatedly, I want to automate that process and really have changes propagated automatically by listening from a target viewpoint to what's going on within, in terms of changes within a source viewpoint. And so as you can imagine, you can have multiple target viewpoints train themselves at a source viewpoint to listen for changes that are occurring in it so that the propagation of those changes can be made to harmonize them across different application contexts. As an example, I could add a new account to my GL and I want to make sure that I insert it into my planning application, accounts dimension, and similarly map it into my consolidation account structure. And so subscriptions can be used to harmonize those changes in an automated fashion. One of the enhancements we've made to the subscription model is around some of the unintended consequences of introducing subscription filters within EDM. The filters allow you to specify specific branches of a tree structure in which you want changes to be propagated to a downstream application, such as, maybe you just want your cost accounts to be propagated to a cost management application from a chart of accounts in your general ledger. You might define a top node filter for that purpose. Similarly, you might define an action filter that says, I only care about additions and deletions and not inserts and moves and removes and things like that that are occurring in the source viewpoint, and so on and so forth. The upshot of that is that when you have shared members, for example, that may reside within that top node filter or the branch filter, and others that may reside outside of it, if there are changes made to the properties of the global properties of that particular node within a shared member that's outside your purview, you still want those changes to be propagated even though they're outside of the filter because they're global in nature. And so with this particular enhancement, what we've delivered is the ability to synchronize those node level properties across to those target viewpoints, even though they may not reside within the filter that you've selected as part of your subscription definition. What this means is that, as an example, if I have selected a top node filter 200 and a shared member has a change that occurred, to its description under a parent 500, those description changes are propagated to the instance under the parent 200, even though the filter essentially limits changes to those changes that are occurring only under 200. So this really makes the record whole and keeps the data internally consistent. From a comparison and data sharing perspective, we've always offered the ability to compare two viewpoints structurally for differences in the nodes, relationships, and properties. But sometimes if you have 50 odd properties being compared, you might want to restrict your comparison just to 2 properties of interest. And so now we've added a filter that allows you to, pick the properties that you want to compare if you wanted to limit that comparison experience within EDM. And then there's a number of other features that we've added, in the data sharing realm in order to facilitate comparison and analysis across and even consumption across 2 viewpoints. As you may know, within EDM, we offer an expression builder experience, which is a visual IDE style experience that allows you to model, expressions for a variety of different purposes, whether it is to calculate derived values, to be able to specify expressions for different kinds of filters, such as extracts and subscriptions or policy filters, as well as do, complex transformations as you share data across different viewpoints from one application context to another. And so we've introduced a number of capabilities across the application from a data type support perspective. One worth noting here is the request object. This allows you to actually use the metadata of a request to be able to drive expressions that may potentially help you do more targeted conditional approvals, for example. We've introduced collections for bound ancestors and locations to help with doing complex validations in alternate hierarchies. We've introduced capabilities around, better math operators for integers and floats, doing data conversions between dates and timestamps, and so on and so forth. And then we've also offered you the ability to copy and paste expressions across context so that you can reuse the expressions that you define. From a reporting and audit perspective, we have a full-featured transaction audit, as well as reporting capability where we are constantly adding new reports. One report worth noting is the record count log report that provides you a breakdown of the contribution that each application dimension and node type makes to the subscription count that you're ultimately responsible for in terms of the records subscribed. And then we've added a REST API that allows you to take to your favorite BI tool the transaction history so that you can run all kinds of complex compliance reporting activities off of it. And then from an integration standpoint, like I touched on, we have a couple of alternative ways to do integration, those that are tied to our packaged application experience that we ship out of the box are essentially the application adapters with the import, the bound imports and exports, and that map to an application connection. And then we introduced right before the beginning of this year the concept of extracts that allows you to extract from any viewpoint, not just the bound ones, using these global connections such as the object store, ERP and EPM cloud connections. And you have a variety of different alternatives in terms of the way you integrate EDM. We have a staging area, sort of like an inbox outbox, where you can post and get files from. We obviously have EPM automate to help you move information from the staging area to the connected applications in a scripted manner. For any application within your SOA ecosystem, obviously we have the REST API, which is full-featured and supports formats including CSV and JSON payloads. And then last but not the least, we are integrated with the EPM task manager that you can use then to specify task schedules using templates in order to synchronize data natively using our import, export, and extract capabilities. So from a user experience perspective, like the rest of our Oracle modules, we have embraced the Redwood experience as our default theme. We've added a number of elements to how you can configure your displays that include or exclude the business process nomenclature. And we've added clustering to simplify how the tools are organized on the landing page for EDM. So with that, that sort of concludes the discussion around what's new within EDM. And next, I wanted to touch on what's coming. So specifically in the upcoming quarter, towards the end of the year, we are introducing a number of capabilities to augment the templates we talked about, to offer an incremental approach to update existing applications rather than only importing new applications. We've got a variety of enhancements to the expression builder that makes it more powerful. We're adding support for things like, previous and next sibling for node objects to support integration with the likes of PeopleSoft and SAP. And then we have a very special feature that I'll touch on here that allows you to compare different parts of the same hierarchy without having to create separate viewpoints. And in the subsequent release in the new year, we're looking to introduce the concept of time labels that really allows you to, on the fly, create viewpoints that are point-in-time viewpoints. And that'll support a really powerful way for doing what-ifing and the like. And so since we're running out of time here, I just wanted to quickly touch on a couple of these features. The first is comparing different parts of the same hierarchy. So as you can see in this picture here, you've got side by side the same hierarchy, the entity hierarchy, where one of these is the original and the other is the duplicate of that original. You can select different parents and then run a comparison across different branches of the same hierarchy. So as an example, if I was maintaining a dimension in planning that contains both the primary and my alternate, I can now use a single viewpoint to run comparisons across those primary and alternates by really creating a separate tab for the same viewpoint and then running a comparison across them to serve my needs. And then as we look to the future around time labels, this is really the ability to generate point-in-time viewpoints on the fly, give you the ability to run compares between them. So my current view versus what my structure looked like a year ago, be able to report on differences, and then also export and consume the viewpoints that represent those point-in-time snapshots. And the really powerful thing about this is not about saving away a set of snapshots and then using them as is possible today, but this is really about the ability to do this on the fly. You could be in the context of your active viewpoints and then be able to traverse different points in time and generate perspectives that go from what things look like today versus what they looked like a year ago in the context of a specific hierarchy, as an example. So with that, I wanted to conclude my prepared remarks and hand it over to Tricia. So
yeah, hi. It looks like we do have one question for you. The question is this similar to the version control we had in DRM?
That's correct. So, really the way I would articulate it is that this provides the ability to do the kind of scenario analysis that you had the ability to do in DRM, where you had a baseline version, and then you could essentially create any point in time views against that baseline over time. And so this is about really sort of going back in time at the click of a button without having to physically instantiate and store snapshots as you would do within sort of a traditional versioning system, which is possible today within EDM. Any other questions?
See any in the Q&A box? Does anybody else have any questions? If so, you can pop it in the chat or the Q&A box. No, I don't see anything. I guess if anybody has any other questions after the session, do you want them to email you? I see that your email is on the screen. Oh, it looks like we do have a question from Brandon. Can you elaborate a little on the versioning of an EDM?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of versioning today, we offer the ability to copy viewpoints. That's really how you engage in snapshotting data. So if you are in the context of a specific dimension viewpoint, you can store away a snapshot of it and then continue to work within that production viewpoint, let's say, uh, as a best practice to retain your transaction history over time. Creating a copy is a sort of a power user capability that you have great control over, and you can use it to copy nodes or copy relationships or both. When you copy both, it results in creating a snapshot that's sort of frozen in time, because we're creating a separate container for the records and the relationships between them. However, if you wanted to continue to consume the, let's say, the production nodes, you would not copy them over. You'd only copy over the relationships. And so, you have a certain amount of control around the copy viewpoint capability that facilitates different kinds of snapshots, either for subsetting purposes, for building what ifs, and for creating historical snapshots that you wouldn't want to change over time, to retain them for reference purposes. So that capability has existed for some time within EDM. What we're talking about here as a roadmap item is more about really facilitating something that'll be possible as available on the fly, in order to construct point-in-time perspectives, run comparisons against them, and then you can decide to keep them or sort of discard them. So hopefully that helps you differentiate the two capabilities.
And it looks like we have one more request asking if you could show the last slide again.
Oh yeah, sure.
And that was from Tom. I'm not sure specifically what they were wanting to see, but thank you for showing that.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions? Is there anything more closely related to versioning in DRM?
I think the key point to take away about DRM versus EDM is that they're really, they take different approaches to solving similar set of problems and use cases, and open up greater degrees of freedom from an EDM perspective, because we've had 10 to 15 years to think about what worked well and what didn't work as well with DRM. So for example, in DRM, we had the concept of versioning, and all of the hierarchies from a mastering perspective were maintained in that version. So the version was the container. Within EDM, we have a sort of smaller container footprint. So at the top level, you have the application, which is a container, and then within it, each dimension is its own container. And so really, the net of it is, from a versioning standpoint, you are now able to effectively version different dimensions, as an example, within a single application, based on a different tenor, depending upon what your requirements might be. So it's much more granular. From a versioning perspective, it's not the whole kitchen sink, if you will. And so that makes for a more nuanced type of opportunity set when it comes to versioning. And so, as we've stated many times, our goal with EDM is not to lift and shift DRM. It is to deliver a cloud native solution that solves the same use cases at DRM and does much more. And so in that spirit, our intent is not to replicate functionality, but to really give you greater degrees of freedom. And that's reflected in the way we are doing versioning.
Great, thank you. It doesn't look like we have any other questions.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for your time and appreciate your participation. And if you need to get a hold of me, feel free to send me an email at rahul.kamath@oracle.com.